new edition of the Middle East and Africa Forum for Sustainability Leaders, a podcast series dedicated to those who have sustainability as part of their job titles and as a core part of their daily responsibilities. They're part of this growing community of people who are part of the growing number of organizational charts dedicated to develop and anchor the sustainability strategies for their respective organizations, which can include from developing more sustainable offerings to reducing the climate and environmental footprint of their organizations, or adopting the growing number of regulations in those two aspects that we're witnessing over the past few years. I'm glad to welcome our guest for this week. He's Ayub Osman, Head of Sustainability for the Middle East and Africa at Ericsson. Welcome, Ayub.
Merci.
Great. And I'd like to kick off the interview asking from the very beginning. You're part of a global technological organization as Ericsson, with global headquarters in Sweden, but with a organizational structure that is very decentralized, with many things working remotely from different parts of the world. I'd like to ask about your current role at Ericsson, and how was it initially identified the need of creating a head of sustainability and corporate responsibility for the Middle East and Africa, and where does it fall within the broader organizational chart of your organization?
Yeah, thank you, Ignacy. So maybe for those who don't know, Ericsson is a Swedish multinational telecommunications company that has been very actively engaged in sustainability for several decades. And for us, sustainability has been something that has been going on for quite a long time. When the company was founded by Lars Magnus Ericsson in 1876, since its inception, we've been driven by the belief that connectivity is set to deliver that positive change, creating a sustainable and connected future. And if you just fast forward 145 years later to today, our current vision still speaks sustainability, where we envisage a world where limitless connectivity improves lives, redefines businesses, and pioneers a sustainable future. Now, coming to your question about setting up the role, for us, sustainability is important and is part of our vision, our strategy, and policy. And we cover a wide variety of topics under that role, such as carbon emissions reduction, energy efficiency, human rights, circular economy, climate action, digital inclusion, and that positive impact on society. I would say that we've formally had this role in the company for a very long time, since 1876, since we've really been driving sustainability for such a long time. But more formally, I would say that the position for head of sustainability was set up close to 2 decades ago. And it's due to our commitment to sustainability, which can be traced back to the early 1990s, when the company began integrating environmental considerations into its operations. And we also published our first environmental report in 1993, which makes us one of the pioneers in the sustainability space. Now, when we set up that role globally, it was then set up in the different markets that we operate in. As you know, with large organizations, you always have a group company, and then you have smaller companies across the globe who then also need to deliver on those sustainability promises that you have. So we set up the role both in our group function, what we call group function, and then across into Middle East and Africa, for example. Now, over the years, we've continually evolved that sustainability role, the agenda, and ensuring that it's in line with global frameworks, addressing emerging challenges. And it really comes back to our Swedish roots. As you mentioned, Ericsson is a company that's headquartered out of Sweden. And Sweden is one of the leading nations and early starters that focus on sustainability. If you recall, back in 1976, the United Nations Environment Program, for example, was set up in Stockholm. So sustainability is almost in our blood, I'd say. Today, we continue to provide people and businesses with that endless opportunity by providing that limitless connectivity that I spoke about earlier on, whilst putting sustainability really at the heart of our vision and our purpose. What is really key, though, is that the sustainability practice, as much as it's been set up, it keeps evolving for most companies because of, for example, regulatory requirements. They could be what you call hot topics that need to be addressed. It could also be related to where the company is going in its journey. So a lot of those things tend to impact where you are in your sustainability journey. Another motivation factor, I would say, for us in setting up this role is the employees. And it's a fantastic benefit, I would say, by being proactive. And when you show that you're leading in a sustainability area, it motivates your employees, but also when you're finding new talent. And Ericsson, again, aims to motivate its employees, engage with them by driving our sustainable practices right through our organization.
Yeah, so it seems like it's been a pretty long journey for Ericsson in terms of their sustainability journey. And I'd like to ask you about the evolution of the different stages of that period since you started reporting on sustainability issues back in the 1990s. How have the different roles evolved in terms of sustainability? We've seen, for example, many companies that a few years ago, sustainability was part of their CSR, corporate sustainability responsibility teams, which was sort of embedded in many cases as part of the marketing communications team, whereas others, they've been more actively reporting on aspects such as the carbon emissions or the amount of plastic that is retired and recycled from their supply chain. Where does Ericsson fall in that sort of framework?
Yeah, so I think, like all companies, it's always been sustainability is one of those functions where it depends on how important it is. And in Ericsson, for example, we refer to ourselves as sustainability and corporate responsibility, unlike other companies that tend to use the term CSR, which has also evolved as a term. So, for example, when you look at more CSR-related activities that are addressing more philanthropic ideas, then you find that you have a separate function that might then be homed depending on maybe under your marketing team, or it could be homed under your strategy team. For Ericsson, sustainability is sitting under our market and corporate relations team. And that's simply because we also see it as a brand strengthener. It's important that your customers understand what you're doing from a sustainability point of view. So we have it sitting under our marketing and corporate responsibility team. Previously, it was sitting under strategy, but we work across the organization. It's just really where we're housed. What we do doesn't matter where we're actually home. So we're quite, I would say, a very independent function in terms of what we do, what we drive. So we're not just a marketing trying to produce, glossy greenwashing type reports, just simply because we, for example, sit under a marketing and comms team. But it's important that when you're doing sustainability work, that you are communicating that out. So one of the hats that you tend to wear when you're the head of sustainability is, how do you communicate outwardly, whether it's to your customers, to your investors, to your employees? And that's why it's very important that you have a communication hat also when you play a sustainability role.
Yeah, also the company published last year their latest sustainability report, where you're also following the same ESG framework that our organizations have been using. ESG standing for environmental, social, and governance aspects. How does the company perform that sort of reporting from different issues, and which from the three letters that include that are part of the acronym are you putting a focus, maybe a greater focus on one of the letters than the others, or are you facing any type of challenge at the time of reporting those issues, or are you using one of the many frameworks and tools that are currently available at the moment? What are your thoughts on that?
So our reporting tends to happen more at a consolidated level. So that happens more at the group function level, as I explained earlier. And we've got a specific team that is involved in producing our reports, also driving the key metrics, the targets that we set. And then we have in the markets, we are actually driving and actualizing those goals. When it comes to ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance, we cover all aspects, I would say, equally well. We have a big focus on the environmental side, where we have set targets, for example, for ourselves around climate action, around energy performance of our products and services that we deliver to our customers and to the market. And then we also have a circularity area where we have a very well-established program called the Product Take-Back Program, which takes back all waste from electronic and electrical equipment back from our customers and disposes them in a sustainable manner, where we recover almost 98% of the components that we recover back. So we have a big emphasis on the environmental sustainability side. So it's one of our 3 strategic pillars, and spend a lot of time looking at, like I said, climate action, energy performance, circularity. Then the second aspect is under the social area, we then look at what we call digital inclusion, which looks at bridging that digital divide. And in there, we tend to spend more time on looking at aspects such as connecting the unconnected. We also try to envisage how we can support our customers with driving financial inclusion in areas where there are lots of people who are unbanked, through again the products that we sell or that we give to our customers. For example, we have an Ericsson wallet platform that's used towards mobile financial services. So we use that aspect to support in driving that financial inclusion. And then we also have other aspects, for example, education. We have a program called Connect to Learn, which we set up in 2010, and it's quite a successful program. We've reached almost 400,000 young people across 36 countries. And with that program, we have different aspects. For example, we look at how do we educate young people around new technologies like 5G, AI, IoT. We also look at how do we support with girls in building those ICT careers. We also look at aspects such as human rights, which is also quite an important part of the social part of the ESG acronym. And we also address issues like women in our company. We've set very, very stringent targets around what percentage of our population, whether it's across the board, whether it's at executive level or it's at line manager level or even at an engineering level. As you can appreciate, Ericsson is an engineering company, and it's not very common that you find that that girls are always taking the ICT courses. So we are trying to encourage that a lot more as part of the targets that we set on the social side. And then on the governance side, rather, we are looking at aspects such as compliance, ethics. We look at our code of business. We ensure that our suppliers, for example, are following our code of business ethics, are also following sustainability targets that we have set on ourselves, and we also push that back across the supply chain so that we can ensure that we're meeting our targets. Back in 2021, we set a target, for example, to be net zero across our value chain by 2040. And we know we can't do that alone. So in order to do that, we need to address all aspects of our value chain, and that includes supplies, for example.
Yeah, and I'd like to ask from an organizational point of view, you mentioned you have a dedicated team who looks into the reporting issues. How does Ericsson organize in terms of coordinating their global sustainability strategy for different regions? Are you following the guidelines from the HQ, or do you have a certain level of autonomy for each of the regions? And which, if that's the case, which aspects are the main ones that you are currently looking for in the Middle East and Africa?
Yeah. So look, I mean, we obviously, all companies always have like some kind of blueprint that you have to follow. Otherwise, you'd be different companies in different markets. So we do have an overall sustainability strategy and guidelines that are set by our group function. And that's where, as I mentioned earlier, we have the strategic pillars that we follow, which is around the environmental sustainability, the digital inclusion, what we call corporate responsibility or responsible business. And then under that, we have different offerings and we have different things that we push to our markets. For example, under environmental sustainability, we have a very famous concept that we call breaking the energy curve, where where our customers who are deploying 5G, for example, it's a known fact that with 5G, you expect there's going to be increased growth in traffic and there's going to be more energy use. And therefore, how can we support our customers, for example, to break that energy curve? So we have those kind of blueprints that are put in. Then as a leader of sustainability in Middle East and Africa, the expectation is for me to then assess what is actually applicable to my market. I could be, for example, if I look at Middle East, I'm seeing a lot more drive around environmental sustainability topics. But when I just shift back to Africa, there is a lot of drive around environmental sustainability, but there's more of a focus, for example, around digital inclusion, where we are doing a lot more on education initiatives. We're supporting on connecting the unconnected. And as I mentioned earlier, also pushing a lot of financial inclusion type initiatives on our sustainability front. So it's not a one size fits all across the globe.
Is that for your industry specifically, or does it also happen, those topics of financial inclusion and digital education, does it happen only in your sector, or you're talking in a broader sense? Across
it happens it happens in our sector, meaning in the telecoms industry. However, what you find is that, of course, you're working with other sectors or other industries. For example, if you're addressing energy consumption, you might be talking to, for example, the manufacturing industry or the transport industry. Of course, we work through our customers who are the operators. And for example, we had a project in Italy, which is connecting ports with 5G. And we did a proof of concept with the port of Livorno in Italy, where we were trying to see how can we use technology to support with addressing sustainability goals or carbon reduction activities through the operator. So that's an example of how we might work with industry, even though it's limited to some of the technology things that we do. When it comes to the digital inclusion side, we work with, for example, the Whitaker Peace Development Initiative, where we work with people who have come from war-torn countries or backgrounds or been afflicted by conflict, and teaching them to use basic ICT skills. So we work with the Whitaker Peace Development Initiative to do that. So it may not be necessarily just limited to the telecom space, but it looks at also the fringe areas, as I'd call it.
So in terms of trends for similar roles to yours, like sort of heads of sustainability, heads of ESG, chief sustainability officers, what are some of the trends you're seeing as among your peers, both in your industry or maybe at a more general scale among other sectors?
Yeah, what I'd say is that we are all sort of seeing the same trends. We might call it different things, but in the telecom industry where I operate largely, there has been an impact more on energy consumption, emissions, and resource use. When I speak to my peers and we compare notes, we see very similar trends, even though there might be, for example, in different industries. But in larger aspect, we see that some of the topics that are very, very hot, especially when you look at sustainability in the Middle East and Africa, climate action and decarbonization is one topic that is very, very critical. There's an increasing urgency to address climate action, climate change. There's a big focus on developing and implementing strategies, for example, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, transitioning to this renewable energy or renewable energy sources. And you're finding also with the energy crisis or the cost of energy going up and skyrocketing, a lot of industries, even the manufacturing industry, for example, or construction industry, is looking at how can we actually have support in reducing our operational costs. And that they've seen is transitioning to renewable energy. So you're seeing that there's a trend moving both from a sustainability point, but at the same time also having that additional benefit of cost reduction, for example. Then one topic that I see that's extremely hot is the net zero topic. And many organizations are addressing this, as I mentioned to you earlier on. Ericsson has set the target to be net zero across its value chain by 2040. That's 10 years ahead of the UN goals. But also you're seeing countries, it's not just organizations, who are beginning to also set their own net zero goals. In the Middle East, for example, UAE last year set a goal at a national level to be net zero by 2025. Another trend that I'm seeing is the topic around circular economy and waste reduction. And again, this is across the industries. It's not just limited to the telecoms sector, whether you're working in, for example, manufacturing where you have effluent going into rivers, or you're working in construction where you have a lot of construction waste. It's still quite a critical area, and that transition to the circular economy where resources are used more efficiently is also quickly gaining momentum. And organizations are beginning to be a little bit more innovative in their approaches in terms of, reducing waste, promoting recycling. You're seeing also, for example, in the mobile network industry, there's this talk of now having eSIMs and pushing for eSIMs rather than having, the little plastic card, or even having recycled plastic card. So that's an example of also how this is an important topic. There's also the social and human rights issues is something that is also still a big trend in my view, where you're addressing, social aspects, diversity and inclusion, labor rights, human rights, and also that community engagement is also critical. And then maybe I could just say one really, two other maybe critical ones is how do you, as much as I'm coming from a telecom industry, I see that digitalization is growing, irrespective of what industry you work in. And marrying that with sustainability and that intersection of digital technologies and sustainability presents opportunities for innovation, exploring how technologies such as 5G, now even the use of artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, data analytics, is supporting with having that smarter resource management, supporting with optimizing energy consumption, driving different types of sustainability models to support with the earlier goals or the earlier trends that I mentioned around carbon reduction efforts across industries. And then the last one is around stakeholder engagement and disclosure. And as you asked me earlier on, how do we do reporting? How is that done? You are finding that, or I am finding that there's a lot of emphasis now on reporting back to the market in terms of what is being done by companies, and heads of sustainabilities are expected to proactively engage with the stakeholders, sometimes including investors, customers, employees, and communities, to really understand and show what they are doing and demonstrating that transparency in sustainability performance.
Yeah, and in terms of the growing focus on sustainability matters across the region, do you see that is taking place as as companies are pursuing maybe a financial gains, that they see there's a commercial opportunity there, or is it maybe due to a growing number of regulations? What are your thoughts on that?
So what happens is a lot of people see sustainability as a headache sometimes, and it's actually a cost rather than actually a benefit. But you've got to really think about it more from the short term and the long term gains. And like I used the example earlier on around the energy costs, you might be investing in, for example, renewables in your company, and there's a huge capital outlay around, for example, solar panels and ensuring that you're then becoming more sustainable. But it does pay off in the long run. Companies are seeing this as a benefit. Like I mentioned before, Ericsson set up sustainability not because we want to just do some greenwashing, but it's more around trying to balance the profit with the planet and the people. But you do see that there is a growing benefit of having sustainability, whether it is for your brand, whether it is for the products that you're offering. It increases, for example, your sales. If I just give Ericsson as an example, where we have a range of products that we're selling to connect people, which is, for example, our radio products. If we go to one of the mobile network operators and they would like to, for example, evaluate us through their procurement against, for example, our competitors, they will look at what are the energy benefits, for example, of the products that you're offering us. And there is a sustainability angle to it. I am beginning to see that also in procurement teams that we're talking to, where they are now beginning to include the sustainability element as part of their evaluation criteria when they're choosing suppliers who they work with. Like I said earlier on, we are doing the same with our suppliers, where we are asking them to, for example, set sustainability targets that are in line with, for example, the 1.5 degrees Paris Climate Change Agreement to limit, to limit temperatures from going beyond 1.5 degrees centigrade. So there is a business benefit for sure. There's a brand benefit for sure, and then there's always people and planet.
So you're saying this type of procurement model that we could see, for instance, in public tenders from governments, where there were certain technical financial criteria to assign the contracts, is also taking place in the private sector, but also including sustainability aspects into that evaluation criteria. Is that it?
Correct. That's true. And this is increasingly becoming common, where it is part of it, whether it's in the private sector or the government sector. Like I mentioned earlier on, right. UAE has set up their net zero goal by 2050. If they are to reach that goal, they will put pressure across the board. It will come to the private sector, and that will trickle down to for example, evaluation processes in the telecom sector. That's an example of where we then support with the UAE targets to net zero, or in Saudi, for example, who have also kept sustainability in their Vision 2030. Again, they have also set some very stringent targets around waste reduction. So 2 years ago, I remember the Saudi Investment Recycling Company, SIRC, also has put very stringent requirements to companies to look at how they are dealing with waste management. So these things will come across.
So in this case, is it mainly the governments from the region who are pushing to advance sustainability across the private sector, or is the private sector taking the lead in some instances?
Very good question. I think it's a mix of both. You do find that private sector companies, sometimes companies that are more globally built, or who have more global operations, they might, for example, like Ericsson, we might have requirements that are coming from other markets that are being pushed because we have to report it irrespective of where we operate. So if I just give you an example, the product take-back program that I mentioned to you is something that we offer as part of our extended producer responsibility. And that's coming from, for example, European Union regulations, where we are expected to do that from a regulatory perspective. Now, that then just goes into the markets that we operate in. But then you do have localized requirements that are being pushed. I'm seeing that again also in some countries where there is a requirement to now, for example, have this product take-back program, which, by the way, we've had since 2005. But more recently, I'm beginning to see that countries are setting those agendas and requiring from the companies that operate within their countries to begin looking at how they're treating waste from electronic and electrical components.
And for my last question, Ayub, what would be your advice for other large organizations that are in the process of creating leadership roles and sustainability-related segments for the first time?
I would say that there are quite a few things that you do need to think about, because sustainability it depends where you are in your sustainability space. If you're just completely setting it up for the first time, then you really need to go back to the drawing board. And the most important, I think, aspect for me is to look at, for example, the leadership buy-in. That's one of the most important things that you need to have. It really starts at the top. If you don't have that buy-in from the top, your entire sustainability program is going to fail. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would also say is don't treat sustainability as another function that you have on the side. It really has to be integrated as part of your business. If you do that, then what you're doing is you're beginning to align your sustainability targets, your sustainability goals with your business goals, and you cannot separate the two. The third aspect I'd say is if you offer products or services, which most companies do, then make sure that you're integrating sustainability in your products and the services that you deliver. And finally, I'd say utilize the power of collaboration. You cannot go on it on your own. The only way to do it is to partner with, like I said, suppliers, with your customers, with the market, whether it's academia or whoever it may be. That's also very important to also do. So those are some of the aspects I would say as advice. And just to give you examples, we're working with a lot of operators in the Middle East, such as STC in Saudi Arabia, EAN Group, Zain Group, where we have inked a memorandum of understandings to join hands in driving our joint sustainability efforts and our journeys to net zero. We have also worked with other critical partners such as UNICEF and the ITU in supporting their Giga project in connecting schools to the internet by 2030. And having those kind of partnerships, you are meeting your goals, you are supporting to meet other goals, and working together hand in hand. Also participating in a lot of industry events. Again, not just to show your brand, but also to begin to have that dialogue and collaborate with like-minded brands to make things happen. LEAP in Saudi last year, we had a lot of good discussions around sustainability. Saudi has also had the Saudi Green Initiative and the Middle East Green Initiative that they've been driving in line with other events. COP28 happening in the UAE this year. That's also a good example of an event that you can participate in. So I would say also get engaged and create that dialogue in order to jointly win in the sustainability journey.
And have you perceived any uptake from the fact that we've been having, or we're going to have the second back-to-back COP in the region? Has that influenced the focus or the activity that the private sector is carrying out in the sustainability space?
I would say so. I think, when something is right in your backyard, you tend to pay more attention to it than when it's so far away. But also, like I said, with the trends that we're seeing, these trends are not happening because you have COP in the Middle East or had it in Egypt last year. They are happening because these are real issues that are beginning to come out. There is the Paris climate change Paris agreement, a climate agreement where it say that if you go beyond the 1.5 degrees centigrade, we are going to have big issues. So governments, countries are all putting a big focus on that. There is the net zero goals set up by the UN by 2050 in order to support this reduction of the 1.5 degrees centigrade. Again, you are having a lot of focus on that. So yes, there is, I would say, a push having events such as COP28 in our backyard that is supporting to drive that a lot more faster, I would say. I mean, let's take COVID as an example, COVID-19. When that happened, all of a sudden you found that that there was a lot of online activity, there was a lot of digitalization that was happening, but that was not because COVID-19 happened. What COVID-19 did is it just made it move a little bit faster than it would normally happen. And that's the same thing with sustainability. When you have COP28 in your backyard, you will push things a lot more faster than you would normally have done. Definitely. It seems 30 minutes go by pretty quickly, but I'd like to highlight those last comments you made regarding the need to obtain the buy-in from the top management, the board level, from companies, as well as making sustainability an integral part of an organization, the workflow or offerings. I think from our experience, we can say other guests we had as part of this series would definitely subscribe those comments. Ayub Osman, Head of Sustainability and Corporate Responsibility for the Middle East and Africa at Ericsson. Thank you so much for your comments and insights today. Thank you so much.